Have you ever wondered what secrets still whisper beneath the ruins of lost empires? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where ancient roads, bridges, statues, and scrolls come alive once more. Each relic, from Rome to Egypt, carries the breath of civilizations long gone yet never silent. Before we begin, like and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. The road that carried the empire. Beneath the sun-washed fields of southern Italy, where olive groves stretch like rivers of silver and the air carries the scent of dust and time, a road still runs, old, cracked, and eternal. It doesn't rush or hum like the highways of today. It breathes. Beneath your feet, it hums softly with the weight of centuries, a heartbeat of the Roman Empire that refuses to fade. This is the Appian Way, the Via Appia Antica, the Queen of Roads, the artery that once carried armies, merchants, lovers, and emperors. Today, it lies quiet beneath cypress trees, its stones uneven and warm beneath the touch of the Mediterranean sun. But if you listen long enough, you might hear the whisper of iron on stone, the distant jingle of harnesses, and the murmur of Latin prayers fading into the breeze. Long before modern roads drew straight lines across the earth, the Romans built this one, not just as a path, but as a declaration. It began in 312 BCE, when Appius Claudius Caecus, a Roman censor, ordered its creation to link the city of Rome with the distant port of Brundisium on the Adriatic coast, a staggering 350 miles away. At first glance, it was just another road. Functional, practical. But in truth, it became something far greater. For Rome, the Appian Way was power made visible. Stone after stone, mile after mile, it was an act of control over nature, over distance, and over time itself. The Romans didn't simply move through the world, they reshaped it, paving the land beneath their empire, as if laying down veins through which the lifeblood of civilization would forever flow. The road began near the Circus Maximus, winding past the catacombs of San Sebastiano and through rolling farmland that was once the beating heart of the Roman countryside. In its day, it was a marvel of engineering, laid with massive polygonal basalt blocks, perfectly cut and fitted without mortar, designed to endure centuries of footsteps and hooves. Beneath the stones lay layers of gravel and sand, carefully compacted to drain rainwater and prevent collapse. It was so well built that large stretches of it still exist today, more than 2,000 years later. Imagine that, a road built before Christ, still supporting the souls of modern travelers. But the Appian Way was not merely an achievement of construction, it was a path of human drama. The first soldiers who marched upon it were bound for the Samnite Wars, carrying spears and the burden of Rome's ambitions. Generals like Scipio Africanus would one day travel these stones on their return from conquest, hailed as heroes by cheering crowds. Senators and traders, slaves and citizens, all shared this road. It was a place where destinies met and diverged, a thread that bound together the scattered provinces of an empire that believed itself eternal. As centuries passed, the road bore witness to triumph and tragedy alike. Along its edges rose tombs and mausoleums, vast marble reminders of mortality. Roman law forbade burial within the city, so the wealthy built their monuments here, great cylindrical towers, intricately carved sarcophagi, and colonnaded memorials, each meant to remind travelers of their power, even in death. The Appian Way thus became a corridor of remembrance, a necropolis stretching into eternity. Today, the tomb of Caecilia Metella still stands proud upon a hill, her massive stone silhouette catching the last light of day. She was a noblewoman of ancient Rome, her name carved deep into travertine. 2,000 years later, it still endures, her silent monument watching over the endless road like a sentinel from another age. But not all who walked the Appian Way were masters of fate. In 71 BCE, after the defeat of Spartacus's rebellion, 6,000 crucified slaves were lined along this very road, their bodies nailed to wooden crosses stretching from Rome to Capua, a haunting display of Rome's vengeance and warning to all who might challenge her. Imagine the sight, mile after mile of suffering under the sun, the groan of wood, the whisper of wind over empty eyes. For the Roman traveler, this was not a place of comfort but of memory, a reminder that the power of the empire was absolute and mercy fleeting. Still, life moved on. Carts creaked along the basalt. Messengers rode with scrolls of law and letters of war. In spring, wildflowers bloomed between the cracks, softening the stern geometry of stone. Children played along its edges, while merchants haggled in shaded stalls. Pilgrims trudged toward shrines on blistered feet, and every step echoed the rhythm of empire, steady, disciplined, eternal. Centuries later, as Rome fell and the world darkened, the Appian Way did not vanish. It survived the collapse of kingdoms, the tread of barbarian armies, the silence of abandonment. Overgrown with grass, haunted by the whispers of ghosts, it endured. Medieval travelers spoke of ruins where spirits lingered. Roman soldiers still marching in moonlight, senators conversing beneath the cypress trees, women in togas drifting like mist over the stones. The road became legend, a bridge not only between cities, but between worlds, a place where the past refused to die. To walk it now is to move through layers of time. The stones are uneven, worn smooth by thousands of years of footsteps. The air hums with the cicada's song. Cypress shadows fall long and still, framing distant ruins. Every ruin, every cracked slab, carries the weight of memory. You can trace the grooves worn by ancient wheels, feel the faint impressions of sandals pressed into volcanic rock centuries ago. Even the silence feels ancient here. Not absence but presence, like a breath waiting to be remembered. Along the way stand the remains of villas, once the luxurious retreats of Rome's elite. The villa of the Quintiliae still sprawls across the countryside, its mosaic floors sunlit and broken, its walls whispering of laughter and feasts that once filled these halls. Farther still lies the church of Domini Quo Vadis, where legend says Peter saw a vision of Christ and turned back toward martyrdom. The Appian Way does not merely tell one story, it holds all of them, interwoven like the threads of a tapestry that no hand can fully unravel. But beyond stone and history, there's something more subtle in its endurance, a message about humanity itself. The Romans built their empire upon discipline, vision, and an almost sacred relationship with the physical world. Roads like the Appian Way were not just means of movement, they were instruments of connection. Every milestone marked not only distance but intention, the will to expand, to reach, to bind the edges of civilization into one continuous whole. Even in ruins, that spirit lingers. The very idea of empire, of order drawn from chaos, of geometry imposed upon wilderness, can still be felt beneath your feet when you stand upon these stones. In the soft gold of evening, as the light fades over the fields of Lazio, the road glows faintly, as if remembering its past. Birds settle in the cypress branches, their songs faint against the murmuring breeze. Somewhere a traveler pauses, just another figure among countless ghosts, and looks down the endless line of stones vanishing into shadow. Perhaps for a moment, they see what the Romans saw, not just a road, but a destiny, a path carved by human hands, stretching forward through centuries, carrying dreams, armies, and the weight of civilization itself. The Appian Way endures not because it is old, but because it was built with purpose. Every slab of basalt is a promise made by a people who believed in permanence, who thought their empire would never fall. And though their marble crumbled and their legions vanished into dust, their road remains. A black ribbon winding through the Italian countryside, older than most nations, still carrying footsteps, still connecting past and present. If you ever walk it, you'll feel the hum beneath your soles, the faint vibration of something that never truly stopped moving. Empires come and go, names fade from stone, but the road remembers. It remembers the iron ring of chariot wheels, the soft murmur of pilgrims, the laughter of children, and the silence after empires fall. It remembers the weight of ambition and the tenderness of faith. It remembers Rome, and through it, us. For in the end, the Appian Way was never just a path between cities. It was the road that carried a dream, one that still whispers beneath every step we take toward the horizon. The bridge that crossed to heaven. Have you ever wondered how a bridge could connect not just two sides of a canyon, but two worlds, two spirits, two times? In the heart of the Peruvian Andes, where the mountains hum beneath the weight of clouds and rivers cut their silver paths through stone, there still hangs a bridge woven by human hands, by patience and by faith. It's called Qumran, and it has outlived empires. It looks fragile, almost impossible, just ropes and grass suspended over a roaring gorge. But it has held the footsteps of messengers, of soldiers, of children and elders for centuries. Every strand carries memory, and every knot ties the living to the ancestors who walked before them. Tonight we cross that bridge together, not as tourists but as quiet travelers of time, listening to what it has to tell us. The wind moves through the canyon before dawn. The world here wakes slowly with thin air that tastes of frost and earth. Mist curls between the cliffs like breath hiding the river, far below a rush of white water that never sleeps. Above it, across a span of empty space, a bridge sways softly in the wind. To see it from afar is to glimpse something ancient yet alive, a golden rope stretched between two cliffs, shimmering against the mountain's dark rock. The Qumran Bridge. 4 thick cables of braided ichu grass anchored deep into the stone on each side, and smaller handrails and footpaths tied with thousands of knots. It stretches about 35 meters, only 118 feet, but it feels infinite when you stand upon it, suspended between sky and earth. No metal, no nails, no modern glue binds it, only grass gathered by hand and twisted by the same ancient method passed down through generations. And somehow it holds. Long before the Spanish arrived, long before roads cut through the Andes, the Incas built a network of rope bridges that connected their vast empire, an empire of mountains, rivers, and stone cities that clung to impossible slopes. These bridges were their lifelines, carrying the Chasquis runners who delivered messages and goods across distances faster than horses ever could. Each bridge was sacred, each one had a soul. To the Inca, the earth itself was alive, the rivers, the stones, the wind. The bridge was not just a thing made by people, it was a being that had to be fed, honored, renewed. The Qumran in particular has never stopped being rebuilt. Every single year since before the Age of Steel, or maps, the people of 4 Quechua-speaking villages gather for the same purpose, to remake the bridge. It begins with a ceremony. Offerings are made to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, asking her permission to begin. The villagers bring coca leaves, chicha beer, and small bundles of grains, laying them upon the ground as they whisper thanks for the grass that grows, for the stone that holds, for the air that does not break them. Then they begin to twist. Each family contributes their share of ichu, the wild highland grass that grows tough and wiry on the Andean slopes. The women twist it into small cords. The men braid those cords into thicker ropes. The sound of fibers rubbing together fills the air, a rhythm older than memory itself. It takes days, even weeks of work to create enough rope for the entire bridge. The ropes are thick, coarse, and golden in color, shining faintly in the sunlight like the fur of a giant animal sleeping across the canyon. When the time comes, they carry the massive cables down to the river's edge and begin the dangerous work of spanning the gorge. It's a moment of breathtaking faith. One end of each main rope is anchored to stone posts, great carved pillars, left by ancestors long gone. The other end must be pulled across by hand, using smaller guide ropes thrown from one cliff to another. The villagers shout, pull, and chant as they work. The river roars louder below, as if warning them of what lies beneath. For a full day, sometimes two, the cables are stretched across, tightened and fastened. The old bridge hanging beside it will soon be cut loose, allowed to fall gracefully into the river below. That too is part of the ritual. The old bridge dies, and the new bridge takes its place. When the final knots are tied, when the handrails are secured, the first person to cross is not an engineer or a leader. It's the eldest of the village, walking barefoot, whispering prayers. The others watch in silence as he moves slowly, hand to rope, foot to plank, trusting that the bridge knows him. When he reaches the other side, a cheer rises, and the people cross one by one. And just like that, the bridge is alive again. The Qumran Bridge has been rebuilt like this, every June for more than 500 years. Even after the fall of the Inca Empire, after the arrival of Spanish rule and modern roads, the tradition never stopped. It became a symbol of resistance, of survival. During the dry season, when the sun burns the hills pale gold and the air smells of dust and grass, travelers still come. Some are historians, some are wanderers, some are wanderers, some are wanderers, some are descendants of those who built the bridge centuries ago. They walk it, sometimes trembling, sometimes laughing nervously at its gentle sway. And always there's that sound, the soft creak of fiber against fiber, the sigh of wind through twisted strands. To cross it is to feel history move beneath your feet. You sense how many lives have passed here. The soldiers carrying messages for emperors, the villagers bringing food or offerings, the children watching their fathers vanish into the mist. You feel the weight of time in the ropes, the warmth of hands that shaped them. The Incas built their empire without wheels or iron, but their roads, known as the Qumran, the Great Inca Trail, spanned over 25,000 miles from Quito in modern Ecuador to Santiago in Chile. These roads crossed mountain ranges, deserts, and forests, connecting cities like Cusco, Machu Picchu, and Ollantaytambo. Rope bridges like Qumran were vital links hanging over rivers and ravines where no road could pass. Each one had caretakers, families, or villages entrusted by the Inca state to maintain them. It was both an honor and a duty. The bridges were inspected, repaired, and renewed under the watch of engineers known as mita, laborers who were part of the empire's intricate communal system. To fail to maintain a bridge could mean the loss of connection, of trade, of the emperor's word itself. So the bridges were sacred, just like the roads and the mountains they spanned, and that sacredness has never faded here. Stand at the edge of Qumran today, and you can almost see it, the empire beneath the mist. You can imagine the messengers barefoot and swift crossing with woven bags of quipu, knotted cords used as a language of numbers and memory. You can picture the lines of travelers carrying goods to Cusco, or the ceremonies held by the builders when the first foot touched the completed bridge. But if you look closer than the tourists do, you'll notice something remarkable. Each strand of rope, each fiber is different. You can see where one is newer, one older one, perhaps made by a child's hand. The bridge is a living record of a people who refuse to let their knowledge vanish. That's what makes it more than a structure. It's a dialogue between past and present. Even UNESCO, which declared Qumran an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, acknowledges it's not the bridge itself that's most valuable. It's the tradition of building it, the skill, the ceremony, the gathering of families, the rhythm of braiding and knotting. These are the true heritage. When the last rope is tightened each year, the entire community feasts. Music fills the air. Laughter rises into the thin mountain sky. The bridge has been reborn, and so have the people. They eat, they dance, they tell stories of their ancestors who built the same bridge before them and who will one day cross it again in spirit. At night, when the festival fades and the firelight flickers against the cliff walls, the bridge stands alone again, quiet, swaying slightly in the mountain wind. It looks fragile under the stars, yet it holds stronger than iron. The bare Andean constellations turn slowly above it, the llama, the river, the fox. Their reflections shimmer faintly on the rushing water below. The rope bridge, golden by day, turns shadowy and pale beneath the moon. Sometimes, if the wind is right, the strands hum a low resonant sound, like a string instrument tuned by the gods. The locals say that's the bridge breathing, and perhaps it is. After all, it was made with breath, twisted and tightened with human rhythm, sweat and heartbeat. The people here believe that Qumran is not simply a passage for travelers. It's a bridge between worlds, the living and the ancestors, the present and the past. Some even say that when a person crosses alone, they can hear the whispers of those who came before carried on the wind. The bridge, they say, remembers every step. The old legends tell of one crossing that happened long ago before the empire fell. A messenger was sent with urgent word from Cusco. He ran day and night through mountains and valleys until he reached this gorge. But when he arrived, the bridge had broken. The fibers had frayed under heavy rain. He stood at the edge, hearing the river below. To fail his message meant doom for his people. So he took a deep breath, tied the quipu to his chest, and leapt across the gap. They say he didn't fall, he was caught midair, by the wind itself, by the spirit of the bridge. When the villagers came to rebuild it, days later they found the quipu resting on the other side. Since then, each time the bridge is remade, a small knot is tied in his honor. You can still find it near the center, a twist slightly different from the others. The Inca rope bridge of Qumran is not a relic, it's a heartbeat, woven into the landscape. It's proof that ancient knowledge doesn't vanish. It breathes through hands, through memory, through ritual. To stand here feeling the wind press against your face, the ground far below, humming with life, is to understand something profound. That strength doesn't always come from steel or stone. Sometimes it's grass, twisted by patience and love, that holds empires together. So when the next dawn breaks over the Andes, and the villagers gather once more to braid the first ropes of the coming year, they aren't rebuilding the past, they're keeping the bridge to heaven alive. And somewhere deep within its fibers, the echoes of footsteps from centuries ago still cross one after another, forever. The statue that waited for rain, beneath the quiet plains of Xi'an, where dust moves like breath, and the earth has memory older than names, a hidden army has been waiting. 2,000 years of silence, 2,000 years of patience. Their faces have not changed, their postures have not faltered, and even now, they stand as if the emperor's call might come again among them. One figure waits differently, not for war, not for command, but for rain. The terracotta archer of Qin Shi Huang's army was never meant to see the sky again. Yet centuries after the empire that made him turned to ash, he still stands, his clay bow ready, his gaze lifted slightly upward as if expecting thunder. The story of the terracotta army is well known, but within that army, every soldier is a world of its own, each crafted with details so precise that individuality bleeds through an empire's order. And among them, the archer is perhaps the most haunting. In the dry yellow soil of Shanxi province, he was uncovered piece by piece, his armor fragmented, his limbs shattered, yet his face perfectly calm as if sculpted from thought rather than clay. When archaeologists brushed away the last of the soil, they found color, faint traces of red and green, painted on his tunic. Pigments once vivid, now ghostly. It meant that once he was alive in color, his uniform bright, his eyes outlined his expression human. And that realization changed everything. The year was 1974, when farmers digging for a well struck something hard. What they uncovered was not stone nor bone, but the tip of a terracotta head. It was the beginning of one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. Beneath their fields lay an army meant to serve China's first emperor in death. Each figure life-sized, each unique, crafted between 2046 and 208 BCE by thousands of workers, artists, and slaves, bound to the will of Qin Shi Huang, the ruler who unified China under one empire. He sought to control even the afterlife. His tomb complex at Mount Li was designed as a mirror of the heavens and the earth, a city beneath the soil protected by soldiers, horses, chariots, and archers guarding their emperor for eternity. The archer we speak of stood among the bowmen in a forward formation, knees bent, body angled forward, ready to shoot. His armor was lighter than that of the infantry, sculpted to allow movement. His hair tied neatly in a knot on the side of his head, his expression not fierce but composed, focused. There was a strange serenity in him, the kind one feels, not in battle, but in waiting. It's that stillness that earned him the name, the statue that waited for rain. For 2 millennia, he stood in silence beneath dry soil. Above him, the seasons turned, dynasties rose and fell. Empires shifted, rivers changed course, but no rain touched his face. The underground vault that held him was sealed tight, darkness thicker than stone. Within that tomb, air never moved, moisture never entered, and yet somehow the colors painted upon him remained protected until the instant light returned. When archaeologists uncovered him, the paint began to flake, vanish within seconds. The air, the very breath of discovery, destroyed what time had preserved. It was as if the past could not survive being seen. The scientists hurried to document every fragment of pigment, every trace of thread in the clay texture, every speck of lacquer that had once shone like metal. They tried to understand how so many could have been made with such precision. The answer lay not only in numbers but in devotion. Over 700,000 laborers are said to have worked on the emperor's tomb: sculptors, potters, engineers, each figure built from separate molds assembled by hand, each face shaped individually so that no two were the same. The archers were special. Their stance required balance, elegance, precision. Some were kneeling, some standing, each positioned to aim toward the invisible horizon. The craftsmen studied the real soldiers of the time, learning how muscles flexed, how armor bent, how eyes narrowed against the wind. To the emperor, this army was his guarantee of control beyond death. But to the artisans who built it, perhaps each figure became more than an order. Perhaps each became a prayer. Every archer's body was hollow, but his heart was full of intent. The clay was drawn from the earth around Xi'an, mixed with water and straw, then fired in massive kilns. The heat turned it hard. The glaze sealed it smooth. Then pigments were applied: malachite green cinnabar, red azurite, blue gold leaf, over lacquer. They were vibrant, once shining like real men dressed for battle, under the eternal gaze of heaven. The statue that waited for rain might have stood near the front ranks, eyes lifted toward the surface as though aware of the sky above him. He was placed there by hands that believed he would never be seen again. Yet something about him feels different. When the rains of Xi'an finally came centuries later, and erosion began to whisper through the soil, it was his face that first broke the surface, as though he had been waiting all along. Waiting not for war, but for that one sound, the soft patter of rain on dust. Perhaps it was poetic justice. The emperor who feared death, who sought eternity in walls of clay, had buried life itself underground, and in doing so preserved it. The rain he could not stop from falling above eventually freed the very men he tried to imprison. Below the earth, scientists unearthed more than 8,000 soldiers and hundreds of horses and chariots arranged in battle formations facing east toward the lands the emperor once conquered. The detail was staggering: fingerprints on clay, ears carved with realism, even veins painted along hands. Each had a purpose, each a place, but the archer stood apart. His posture revealed agility and skill, suggesting that the sculptors understood anatomy deeply. The creases in his sleeves, the folds in his tunic, the delicate curvature of his lips spoke of an artistry so refined it blurred the line between man and statue. Walk among them today, inside the vast museum that now guards them, is to feel both awe and unease. The silence inside is immense. Footsteps echo softly, but never loudly. The soldiers stand frozen mid-command. Their eyes, though unseeing, seem aware. Their expressions calm, not in peace, but in perpetual duty. You can almost feel the weight of the emperor's ambition pressing down on them still. The terracotta army was not built for beauty. It was built for control, for Qin Shi Huang believed he could govern the afterlife as he did the world above. He unified script, currency, law, and road, but he ruled with fear. He burned books, buried scholars alive. He thought that through order he could achieve immortality. Yet what survived of him is not his living empire but his silent clay one. The irony is profound. The archer who once bent his bow to obey now endures longer than the emperor he served. Perhaps that's why his face carries a quiet defiance, a calm that seems to say, "I will wait as long as the earth remembers me." The soil around Xi'an still hums with unseen chambers, deeper tunnels yet unopened. Ancient texts speak of rivers of mercury within the central tomb of Qin Shi Huang, guarded by traps that could kill intruders. The main burial chamber itself has never been excavated, out of respect and fear of both legend and contamination. If those rivers exist, they shimmer still beneath the mountain, sealed and untouched. And somewhere near them are more figures unseen, waiting like the archer for their second birth. In the years since the discovery, scientists have recreated the archer's stance in studies, finding that his balance and proportions matched that of a trained warrior. His right hand curved perfectly to hold a now-vanished bow, his left poised to steady the string. His eyes angled slightly upward, not forward, as if expecting something from the heavens. The poetic truth is hard to ignore. He was sculpted in waiting, perhaps by an artist who dreamed of rain while shaping clay in the dry furnace of Xi'an. Every detail of him carries human touch. The sculptor's thumbprint along his neck, the faint smoothing of clay where breath might have been held steady. He is at once machine and man, creation and creator's memory. When rain finally fell over Xi'an in the modern era and moisture touched the pits for the first time since their burial, it was as though time blinked open. The smell of wet earth mingled with ancient dust, and for a moment those clay faces seemed to darken with life again. Visitors reported an eerie sensation, as if the soldiers were exhaling, as if the ground itself sighed in relief. 2,000 years of silence released with the scent of rain. The statue that waited had finally heard what he was promised. The site itself is immense, covering nearly 20,000 square meters of excavation, but most of the complex remains unexcavated. The Chinese authorities protect it, knowing that the moment air touches the pigments, the colors fade like memory caught in sunlight. So, the archer stands under controlled humidity beneath lights that mimic dawn. He is preserved, not just as art, but as testimony. He represents the human urge to last, to endure, to leave behind something that cannot die. Even in silence he speaks a language older than words. The terracotta archer is not alone. Thousands surround him in the dark, cool halls of the museum, lined shoulder to shoulder, their faces carved by hands long turned to dust. But if you look long enough you can see him among them, his gaze a little higher, his stance a little freer. Maybe the sculptor made him in his own image. Maybe he dreamed through him, leaving a trace of his own longing. The emperor sought immortality through power, the sculptor through creation. In the end it was the latter who won. The clay remains. The man's name is gone, but his work breathes through centuries. The rain above Xi'an still falls every spring, washing the fields, the same fields where farmers once dug for water and found an army instead. And each time it rains, some say the water seeps down through the soil, reaching the old chambers, touching the clay, ever so lightly as if greeting an old friend. So when you stand before the terracotta archer, look at him not as a relic but as a messenger. He waited for rain, not for the emperor's command. He waited for the sky to return, for time to remember him. And in that patient waiting, he became immortal. Sometimes eternity isn't granted by kings or gods. It's shaped by hands that believed clay could hold a soul. And tonight, as the world above Xi'an falls into the quiet of sleep, the rain begins again, softly, steadily, and somewhere beneath the earth, the archer's silent face turns upward, as if listening, as if remembering the sound he had waited 2,000 years to hear. The scroll that breathes smoke. In the desert, silence holds its breath. The wind moves over the sand in long, sighing waves, curling around cliffs that have been burned by sun and time. Here, where the Dead Sea glows like a sheet of molten glass, the air itself feels ancient. It's the kind of quiet that makes you think the earth is listening. Once, more than 2,000 years ago, a group of men walked this same path, their feet crunching on gravel, their robes pressed by dry heat, carrying something fragile, something sacred, something the world wasn't meant to see for millennia. They found refuge in the caves of Qumran, hollowed chambers carved into limestone cliffs, where they hid their writings, scrolls inked with secrets of faith, prophecy, and a vision of a world reborn. For centuries, the desert kept its promise. The scrolls slept, wrapped in linen, sealed in clay jars, their ink dark and defiant, even as empires fell and languages faded. It wasn't until 1947, when a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-Tadib hurled a stone into a cave and heard the echo of pottery shattering, that the world took its first breath of that buried smoke. The air that day must have felt still, the sound of breaking jars carrying through the canyon. He crawled into the shadowed chamber, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. What he found seemed ordinary at first, old clay jars capped with bowl-shaped lids, but inside them were rolls of parchment and papyrus, dry but intact. He had no idea that he was holding the oldest known versions of the Hebrew Bible. When he and his companions brought them to Bethlehem to sell, the scrolls began their long, tangled journey into history, traded by dealers, inspected by scholars, disputed by governments, as if the world wasn't ready to let go of their mystery. The scrolls spoke of light and darkness, of sons of truth and sons of deceit, of the teacher of righteousness who awaited deliverance, and of a coming war between the forces of heaven and earth. But beyond prophecy, they revealed something else, the lives of a forgotten community who believed they were preserving divine order in a collapsing world. The men of Qumran, likely members of a sect called the Essenes, withdrew from Jerusalem's corruption and noise to live by the Dead Sea, where they could purify their souls in solitude. They built ritual baths, scriptoriums, and storerooms, and every day they copied sacred texts by hand, line after line, letter after letter, until the rhythm of writing became a form of prayer. When the ink dried, they checked it again, ensuring that each curve and mark aligned with the will of heaven. If one error crept in, the page was buried, not corrected. To them, words weren't just symbols, they were fragments of creation itself, the breath of God captured on skin. Imagine that, the hum of cicadas outside, the smell of oil lamps, the slow drag of reed pens over parchment. The scribe pauses, dips his quill, and exhales, as if syncing his breath with eternity. Outside, the desert stretches on in silence, but history was never silent. It waits, even in the dust. The Dead Sea itself is a mirror that reflects not just the sky, but the weight of centuries. In its depths lies salt so heavy that nothing lives, a stillness that mirrors the sacred stillness of the scroll's slumber. Scholars would later find over 900 fragments across 11 caves. Psalms, legal texts, hymns, calendars, apocalyptic visions, all preserved in the dryness of the desert air. The scrolls weren't uniform. Some were burned, brittle, shattered into 1,000 fragments. Others survived whole, ink still black as night. The great Isaiah scroll stretched over 7 meters, its prophecies unbroken. The community rule, or Sarakaya Hadi, described their laws, their meals, their punishments, their faith in divine order. And among them were hidden writings that never entered the Bible, tales of fallen angels, of heavenly wars, of mysteries too strange to canonize. It was as if the scrolls had held on to an older world, a time when heaven and earth were not yet strangers. Yet the question remains, who hid them, and why? Were they saving their sacred library from Roman destruction during the Jewish revolt of 66 CE, or were they preserving something more, a message meant for a future that would rediscover belief after forgetting it? Each scroll feels like a whisper left unfinished. Each fragment carries a breath of the scribe who wrote it. Even the material itself tells a story. Parchment made from goat and gazelle skin, smoothed with pumice, stretched over wooden frames. Ink crafted from soot and oil, mixed with honey, thickened with gum arabic. Every stroke was deliberate, every margin precise. They didn't write for themselves, they wrote for eternity. And yet eternity was patient. When archaeologists finally entered the caves in the 1950s, they found fragments lying in dust, scattered by time and looters alike. The scrolls had waded through wars, through empire, through faith's own transformation. Some had fused with rock, others had turned to ash at the edges, like smoke frozen in time. Even as scientists worked to piece them together, the act felt more like resurrection than restoration. Slowly, word by word, line by line, the voices returned. For decades the scrolls were hidden again, not by desert, but by human hands. Locked away in vaults, guarded by scholars who feared misinterpretation, they became another kind of secret. Only in the 1990s were the photographs released to the world, revealing the full scope of their mystery. What emerged wasn't just a religious treasure, it was a window into the evolution of human thought. The scrolls bridged ancient and modern belief, showing how people once wrestled with morality, destiny, and divine silence. They showed that faith had always been layered, always uncertain, always human. Today, the scrolls rest in the shrine of the book in Jerusalem, a museum built to resemble the jars that once protected them. Inside, light is carefully dimmed, humidity controlled, every breath measured to keep the ink from fading. Visitors move quietly, as if walking through the memory of a prayer. They look at the curved letters, the spaces between them, and realize that what survived wasn't just text, but the persistence of human spirit, the need to make meaning even when the world is falling apart. Outside, the desert remains unchanged. The same wind that once filled the caves still sweeps the cliffs, still hums through the cracks of Qumran. Somewhere, perhaps, another jar lies buried, untouched. Perhaps another message waits for a careless stone to break the silence again. The Dead Sea itself gleams under the sun, its salt-white shores shimmering like bone. The air smells of minerals, of history, of something eternal and unfinished. And when dusk falls, the color of the sky turns the same gold as the scrolls once did under the lamplight. In that fading light, it's easy to imagine the scribes still at work, their hands steady, their eyes tired, their hearts filled with a faith that time could not erase. The scrolls may have been silent for 2,000 years, but silence can hold 1,000 voices if you listen closely enough. In the hush of the desert, where smoke once breathed from parchment, the past still whispers, not as myth, but as memory, carried on the wind that never stops moving. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls did not end in the caves of Qumran. It began there, but their second life, the one that reshaped the world's understanding of ancient faith and the birth of scripture, unfolded in laboratories, museums, and the minds of those who dared to interpret them. After the shepherd's chance discovery, Archaeologists from the Palestine Archaeological Museum and the École Biblique raced to locate the remaining caves, guided by rumors whispered through Bedouin tribes. Each cave revealed another chapter of the same story. Scrolls hidden in jars, fragments scattered like leaves caught in time's wind. The most famous of these, Cave 4, yielded over 15,000 pieces, brittle, blackened, some barely the size of a fingernail, yet when pieced together, they formed the heartbeat of an ancient library. The scholars who handled them did so with reverence, knowing a single breath too close could turn parchment into dust. Every fragment was numbered, studied under magnifying lenses, translated in whispers. These were not merely words, they were echoes of hands, of rituals, of lost belief systems. In their faded ink lay traces of human emotion, fear, devotion, longing, the same forces that built temples and toppled them. As the years passed, the Dead Sea Scrolls ignited both fascination and controversy. The Vatican was accused of hiding sections that might contradict official doctrine. Scholars argued over ownership, translation, and meaning. Some claimed the scrolls proved early links between Jewish mysticism and Christian thought. Others insisted they represented an entirely separate tradition. Beneath all the debate, one truth remained. The scrolls had revealed that faith had never been one voice but a chorus, and each line that survived was a note in that ancient, ongoing song. One of the scrolls, known as the War Scroll, spoke of a cosmic battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. It described trumpets, banners, angels, and warriors, written with an urgency that felt almost alive. Another, the Thanksgiving Hymns, flowed with personal prayers of anguish and redemption, written in a tone that felt startlingly human. Confessions of weakness, pleas for strength, songs of gratitude in isolation. The community rule described discipline so rigid it bordered on sacred obsession. Communal meals eaten in silence, ritual immersions before every act, a belief that purity was not achieved through words but through structure. These people, whoever they were, had not only recorded their beliefs, they had built a world out of them, and when the world outside began to crumble, they sealed that world away in jars and entrusted it to the desert. Centuries later, the same dry winds that once whistled through their camp carried whispers of rediscovery. For archaeologists who worked at Qumran, the site itself became a puzzle. Were the Essenes truly its builders, or had the scrolls been brought there from Jerusalem to be hidden during war? The ruins revealed long dining halls, inkwells, water channels carved for purification, evidence of a disciplined order. Yet no bones of scribes were found, no tombs marked their presence. Only fragments of pottery, lamps and tools remained, silent and functional, as if their owners had stepped away only for a moment. The Dead Sea itself seemed to mirror the mystery, still, reflective, impossible to penetrate. When the sun rose, it turned into a sheet of molten gold. When night fell, it became a pool of stars. Everything around it felt suspended between heaven and earth, between memory and dream. In time, scientists turned their focus to the scroll's physical nature. Using infrared photography, they unveiled letters invisible to the naked eye. Later, DNA sequencing traced the animal skins to multiple herds, proving that different communities had contributed to this library. Carbon dating confirmed their age between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE, aligning them with the lifetimes of prophets, kings, and wanderers, whose voices had long been considered myth. Each test pulled the scrolls further from legend and deeper into reality, and yet, the more we learned, the stranger they became. Some texts spoke of an impending apocalypse that never came. Others outlined secret calendars, solar, not lunar, suggesting an entirely separate rhythm of life. One parchment described the Book of Mysteries, a work of esoteric philosophy that pondered the structure of divine wisdom. It was as if these ancient scribes had tried to map the mind of the universe itself. To read them today is to feel the same unease that must have filled the caves, the sense that the line between history and eternity was thinner than anyone believed. Even the ink, when examined under microscopes, seemed to breathe. Made of carbon soot and oil, it shimmered faintly when light passed across it, as though holding a glint of its maker's soul. Some fragments were written in delicate, formal Hebrew, others in Aramaic, the language of everyday speech in Judea. One was in Greek, showing how far their influence reached. Together they painted a portrait of a people who stood at the edge of change, their pens trembling between two worlds, the old faith of Israel and the emerging philosophies that would shape the modern West. Yet amid all this knowledge, one question remained untouched. Why hide them? The scrolls could have been lost during the Roman invasion, when the legions marched south in fire and iron. Perhaps the scribes had no choice but to scatter their library before the flames reached the Dead Sea. Or perhaps they had always known they were writing for an audience yet to be born. Some modern scholars whisper that the very act of hiding the scrolls was a ritual, a burial of words, so that their resurrection would mark a new age of understanding. And perhaps that is why the desert preserved them so well. It wasn't only dryness, it was devotion. Today, in the shrine of the book, the great Isaiah scroll lies under dim, sacred light. Its words curve across the surface like waves on an ancient sea. Tourists move quietly past it, unaware that their own reflections shimmer faintly on the glass, merging their faces with the writing of prophets. The architecture itself mirrors duality, the white dome representing the jars, the black basalt wall behind symbolizing the war between light and darkness. It's as if even in display, the scrolls continue to teach. For decades now, digital imaging has brought their fragments to the world. Anyone can zoom into a single letter written 2,000 years ago and see where the quill lifted, where the scribe paused. There's something almost humanly intimate about that, the reminder that faith and art both depend on the movement of a single hand. And still, there are secrets left, hidden layers of ink, faded lines that only technology, not yet invented, may one day reveal. The scrolls have waited this long, they can wait longer. Outside, the caves of Qumran still gape open, their entrances half buried by dust. Tourists climb their paths, unaware of the delicate silence that lingers within. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, it sounds like whispers, like the breath of parchment. The walls echo faintly, as if the words themselves never left. In the distance, the Dead Sea glows under a moon so bright it looks like fire seen through smoke. The same moon the scribes once saw, perhaps on their last night together. Maybe one of them stood outside, scrolls wrapped in cloth at his feet, watching the horizon burn with Roman torches. Maybe he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the reader who would one day find his words, the stranger in the future, standing in the same desert air. That reader is us. When we open the scrolls, we don't just read, we listen. The ink doesn't merely tell us what they believed. It shows us that we too are part of the same endless search for meaning, for truth, for connection to something greater than time. The scrolls breathed smoke once, when the lamps burned low and hands still trembled with faith. They breathe again now, in the light of our curiosity. Across 2 millennia, through war, silence, sand, and rediscovery, their voices rise like heat from stone, a reminder that words can outlast even the civilizations that wrote them. The desert never forgot, it simply waited. And in that waiting, the scrolls learned the oldest truth of all, that even silence can carry scripture, if someone is willing to listen. The sand that remembered footsteps. Beneath the burning sun of southern Jordan, the desert lies quiet, a vast expanse of ochre dunes, red cliffs, and wind-carved valleys where shadows drift like whispers from the past. The air hums faintly with heat, carrying grains of sand that have outlived empires. Somewhere beyond the horizon, hidden behind stone and silence, waits a city carved not from imagination, but directly from the bones of the earth itself, Petra, the rose-red city. To approach it is to step into a mirage that solidifies with each footstep, revealing a place that once defied nature and time. For centuries, its existence was almost a rumor, a fable murmured among travelers who spoke of a city glowing like fire in the sun. But to those who once lived there, Petra was more than legend. It was the beating heart of an empire of traders, a crossroads of worlds where desert met sea, east met west, and gods met men. Its most famous face, the treasury, or Al-Husna, stands like a frozen moment in stone, an intricate facade sculpted into rose-colored sandstone. To gaze upon it is to see the impossible. Columns, pediments, and figures of myth cut directly into a canyon wall so high it swallows the sky. It is both a temple and a tomb, both a monument and a mystery. But before the treasury became a wonder, Petra was something simpler, a settlement cradled in a desert valley where water was more precious than gold. The Nabateans, the people who built Petra, understood that secret. They were masters not of conquest, but of adaptation. Where others saw lifeless sand, they saw opportunity. Where rain fell only a few times a year, they found ways to catch and command it. They turned arid cliffs into homes, pathways, and temples. They tamed flash floods into flowing channels, and carved reservoirs into rock that could feed thousands. In the soft dawn light, Petra's cliffs shimmer with colors that shift like breath. Crimson, gold, and lavender melt together as if the stones themselves remember fire. Imagine the sound of sandals against rock, the murmur of traders speaking in tongues from every corner of the ancient world. Camels snort softly, the smell of incense drifts through the Sikh, the narrow canyon that serves as Petra's entrance. The walls of the Sikh rise like guardians, smooth and towering, cut by centuries of wind and water. At some points the sunlight vanishes entirely, replaced by a cool stillness that feels almost sacred. Then suddenly, light. The canyon opens like a curtain, and there it stands. Al-Khazna, 2 stories tall, yet impossibly grand. Corinthian columns support a triangular pediment, its surface alive with sculpted figures. Above it, a thalos, a circular temple front, crowned by a single urn that legend once claimed held hidden treasure. That legend, in fact, gave the treasury its name. Bedouins once fired rifles at the urn, believing it held gold left behind by pharaohs or kings. The stone still bears the scars. Yet beneath those marks lies a deeper truth. The treasury was likely never a store of gold, but something far more human, a tomb, a resting place for a Nabatean king, perhaps Aretas IV, who ruled during Petra's height around the 1st century CE. But in a land that thrived on trade, symbols mattered more than secrets. The facade's Greek-style columns and Egyptian motifs were no accident, they were a declaration. Petra was a city between worlds, and the Nabateans were its translators. They spoke the language of stone, blending Hellenistic elegance with Arabian spirituality. They were desert merchants who could negotiate with Romans and Persians alike, who could move frankincense and myrrh across continents, from Yemen to Damascus to the Mediterranean ports. Walking through Petra today is to move through silence that was once alive with purpose. Past the treasury, the valley opens into a vast amphitheater cut from living rock, big enough for thousands of spectators. Carved dwellings line the cliffs, their entrances like hollow eyes gazing over the valley. To the left, a steep path climbs toward the high place of sacrifice, where altars were carved into the mountain's crest. Here priests once stood beneath the sun, performing rituals whose meanings now flicker between guesswork and myth. The scent of smoke would have drifted into the air, mingling with desert wind, the chants of worshippers echoing down the canyon walls. Further beyond lies the monastery, Al-Dadir, even grander than the treasury, though simpler in design. To reach it, one must climb nearly 800 stone steps, winding past rock-hewn tombs and quiet plateaus. When you finally arrive, the reward is not just the sight of the monument, but the silence that surrounds it, a silence so complete it seems the mountain itself is listening. Here among the carved facades and sun-bleached stones, one realizes that Petra was never meant to dominate the landscape. It was meant to become part of it. The Nabateans built as if they were sculpting with the earth's breath. They left no sprawling palaces or towering fortresses. Their wealth flowed instead through trade, incense, spices, silk, and rare minerals. Caravans would wind through the desert, following routes mapped not by stars but by wells, moving like veins through the heart of Arabia. Petra was their oasis, their safe haven, and their statement to the world that the desert itself could nurture civilization. Yet even in their success, the Nabateans lived under the weight of impermanence. They built for eternity, but they understood time's hunger. Sand was both their enemy and their companion, eroding, reshaping, and preserving all at once. When the Romans arrived in 206 CE, they absorbed Petra into their empire. Roads were built, architecture adapted, but something subtle began to fade. The Nabatean spirit, pragmatic yet mystical, slowly dissolved into the uniform rhythm of Rome. Trade routes shifted, maritime commerce grew stronger, and the desert roads fell quiet. Petra's importance waned, its lifeblood drained by changing tides of commerce and empire. By the Byzantine era, it became a ghost of its former self, still inhabited but fading. Earthquakes and time conspired to bury its heart. Sand filled its streets, wind sealed its stories. Centuries later, when Western travelers spoke of a lost city, Petra's name resurfaced like a dream. In 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, disguised as an Arab pilgrim, convinced local guides to lead him through the Sikh. When he emerged into the open and saw the treasury for the first time, his journal fell silent for a moment. Words seemed inadequate. He called it one of the most elegant remains of antiquity. In that instant, Petra returned to the world's memory. Yet even rediscovered, Petra keeps its secrets. Archaeologists still debate the true function of many of its structures. Was the treasury a tomb or a temple dedicated to a god of life and death? Were the elaborate facades mere decoration or symbolic pathways between the mortal and divine? In the soft twilight, when the sandstone glows red as embers, the answers feel close, but never quite within reach. The wind seems to whisper names, the walls shimmer with shifting light, and the sand underfoot feels alive, as if remembering every footstep that ever crossed it. What makes Petra so haunting is not just its beauty, but its humanity. Every carving, every step, every chisel mark bears the trace of hands that refuse to surrender to the desert. Imagine the sculptors climbing precarious scaffolds, hammering day after day, dust caking their faces. They worked not with blueprints but with vision. They carved from top to bottom, an approach that required both genius and faith, for one mistake could not be undone. And when they stepped back from their work, perhaps they saw in the stones something divine, a reflection of their own persistence against nature's indifference. The treasury's columns are not simply architectural triumphs, they are prayers in stone. The urn at its crown, once mistaken for a treasure jar, is a metaphor for eternity itself. Beautiful, unreachable, and empty. It symbolizes the futility of grasping what time always takes away. Even the name Al-Khazna, given by Bedouins centuries later, carries irony. The treasure was never gold, it was memory, the endurance of human creation against decay. Petra, at its core, is an illusion that became truth. A city hidden in rock, sustained by rain that barely fell, built by a people whose names we can scarcely pronounce, yet whose artistry still stops the breath of every traveler who wanders through its canyon gate. The Nabateans turned scarcity into elegance. They shaped survival into art. Their legacy whispers not through written words but through the architecture that still holds light and shadow in perfect balance. To stand before the treasury is to see centuries folded into one moment. The sun sets behind the cliffs, the stone ignites with color, and the air cools. You hear nothing but the faint sigh of wind moving through the sick, and for an instant the city feels awake again, waiting for footsteps, remembering every one that came before. When night falls over Petra, the canyons transform. The desert's heat seeps away into the rocks, and silence settles so deeply it seems to hum. Moonlight glides across the facades, revealing a different kind of beauty, one stripped of daylight's fire, and dressed instead in quiet silver. The treasury, once glowing rose and gold, now gleams pale as bone. Stars spill above the cliffs, reflected faintly in the hollows carved by human hands centuries ago. To walk through Petra after sunset is to feel the ghost of the ancient city stirring, not haunting, but remembering. The air is heavy with presence. Somewhere in the distance, the faint scent of wood smoke from a Bedouin camp drifts through the Sikh, mingling with the smell of cool stone. In the hush, it's easy to imagine the old city breathing again. By day, Petra was a crossroads of empire. By night, it was a sanctuary, a place where the desert's emptiness gave way to a hum of life. Lanterns once flickered outside carved doorways. Traders rested their camels, and water gurgled softly through channels cut deep into the rock. Those channels were Petra's veins, proof of the Nabateans' greatest genius. They knew that water was both the desert's cruelest test and its rarest gift, so they built an invisible city beneath the visible one, an intricate system of cisterns, reservoirs, and aqueducts that caught and stored every drop of rain. When sudden floods roared through the canyons, their engineers had already anticipated them. They had carved channels that bent and curved like veins, slowing the current, guiding it into safety. The people of Petra didn't simply build in stone. They listened to it, worked with it, and let it teach them how to survive. Archaeologists have uncovered sections of that hydraulic network, still functioning after 2,000 years. Even now, the channels collect water when it rains. The Nabateans sculpted their landscape the way a calligrapher sculpts language, with precision, rhythm, and reverence. Their mastery of water was not just practical, it was spiritual. To control water in the desert was to hold a kind of magic, a dialogue between human intention and divine mercy. The temples and tombs carved into Petra's cliffs were not random monuments. They were placed where earth and sky, life and death, trade and worship intersected. As Petra grew, it became a city of contradictions. It was both sanctuary and spectacle, both humble in its desert origins and opulent in its ambition. The main street, once lined with colonnades and markets, pulsed with color. Merchants from the Red Sea, Babylon, Egypt, and even Greece brought goods and stories. The scent of frankincense and cinnamon filled the air. Silk brushed against sandstone, languages blended, Nabatean, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, creating a hum that never truly died but lingers in the stone's vibrations if you listen closely enough. The city was alive with movement, yet everything within it was still carved from stillness. That is Petra's paradox, a living world frozen in rock. And like all human marvels, Petra's glory began to dim, not with war or fire but with change, the kind that moves slowly, invisibly, until it's too late to see. As Rome expanded, the old caravan routes that once brought life to Petra shifted toward the sea. Ships replaced camels, the incense trade faltered. The desert roads, once echoing with the creak of saddles and the songs of travelers, fell quiet. The Nabateans adapted as long as they could. They built Roman-style baths, temples, and even a nymphaeum, a public fountain to show their place in the empire. But the pulse of the city was weakening. An earthquake struck in 363 CE, devastating much of Petra. Its cliffs trembled, its facades cracked, and its channels filled with rubble. Some rebuilding followed, but the city's spirit was already waning. Over the next centuries, the sands moved in, swallowing roads and burying homes. The once busy amphitheater became a hollow shell for wind. The treasury's columns gathered dust instead of footsteps, and so Petra faded. Not destroyed, but forgotten, its memory sealed by geography and time. For the Bedouin tribes who roamed the region, Petra was never truly lost. They called it the City of the Rock, and told stories of jinn and spirits that guarded its tombs. The treasury's urn, glinting under the sun, was said to hold gold hidden by ancient kings. Parents warned children not to linger near the canyon at night, where whispers could be heard if one listened too closely. These myths preserved Petra's aura even as its name disappeared from maps. For the rest of the world, it became a legend. In 1812, that legend breathed again. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, traveling under the name Sheikh Ibrahim, rode through the Jordanian desert on a pilgrimage toward Mecca, but he had another mission: to rediscover lost cities, whispered about in old texts. When he heard locals mention ruins hidden behind the mountains, he disguised his curiosity with caution, claiming he wished to sacrifice a goat to the prophet Aaron at a nearby tomb. The guides led him through the Sick, the narrow canyon that winds for more than a kilometer between walls, rising up to 80 meters high. Imagine that moment, the sudden glow of sunlight at the canyon's end, the reveal of Al-Khazneh emerging like an apparition. Burckhardt stood transfixed, his words later barely containing the wonder: a facade cut from solid rock, delicate as lace, towering as a palace. He could not linger long, fearing suspicion, but he had seen enough to change history. In his notes, he described Petra as a scene of romantic grandeur, a phrase that would soon ignite the imaginations of explorers and artists across Europe. Over the next century, travelers, archaeologists, and photographers followed. Painters captured the treasury's glow, poets compared it to a mirage, and archaeologists began to peel away the layers of sand. Each excavation revealed not just artifacts but echoes, fragments of pottery, inscriptions in Nabatean script, coins bearing the faces of kings long forgotten. Slowly, the story of Petra began to reassemble itself like a mosaic. The Nabateans, once dismissed as nomadic traders, emerged instead as innovators. They mastered not only water but diplomacy, language, and art. They fused Greek and Roman aesthetics with their own Arabian identity, creating an architecture unlike any other, one that didn't dominate its environment but harmonized with it. Every facade in Petra was both unique and familiar, part of a larger rhythm that flowed through the canyons like music. Even the choice of stone mattered: sandstone that could shift color with the sun, mirroring life's own impermanence. In the 20th century, archaeology met preservation. Scholars from Jordan and around the world began documenting and stabilizing Petra's structures. Yet they soon realized that the greatest threat was not time, but touch, tourism, erosion, and the fragile balance between exposure and decay. The more Petra was revealed, the more it risked vanishing again. Every footstep wears away a little more of the stone that has already survived millennia. Every breath of moisture from visitors subtly changes the rock's chemistry. The city endures, but quietly pleads for gentleness. Still, standing in Petra, one cannot help but feel awe. The treasury's facade, framed by the narrow slit of the Sick, looks like a gateway to something eternal. It's easy to imagine ancient processions passing through, priests bearing incense, kings carried on litters, or perhaps ordinary travelers seeking fortune. Some scholars believe that the treasury, though used as a tomb, was also symbolic, a message in stone about life's passage from one world to the next. The urn atop its crown could represent the soul's ascent, the eagles carved into its pediment, guardians of heaven, the Amazons and mythic figures, protectors of what lies beyond sight. Petra's builders left few written words, but they left architecture that speaks louder than any scroll. In the desert's silence, the stone tells their story, of ingenuity, born from scarcity, of beauty carved from survival. To live in Petra was to live on the edge of the possible, to make permanence from impermanence. Perhaps that's why it feels alive even now. Today, Bedouin families still live near the site, guiding travelers through the canyons, selling trinkets carved from the same rose-colored rock their ancestors shaped. At night, they light hundreds of candles in paper lanterns, lining the path through the Sick toward the treasury. As you walk that glowing trail, the sound of a flute drifts through the canyon, echoing off the walls. And when you finally stand before Al-Khazneh illuminated by flickering light, the centuries vanish. The stone shimmers like liquid gold. The air feels charged, as though time itself has paused to breathe. You can almost hear the murmur of ancient traders, the chant of priests, the laughter of children chasing shadows across the sand. For a moment, the city remembers. And when the wind shifts, carrying a grain of dust against your cheek, it's hard not to feel that Petra, the city that once ruled the desert, is not truly gone. It simply waits. Because Petra was never just a city, it was a promise that even in the harshest lands, beauty can bloom, that stone can speak, that silence, if shaped by human hands and faith, can outlast the noise of empire. And as dawn breaks over the cliffs once more, painting the treasury in its first blush of rose light, one truth becomes clear: the desert forgets everything except what deserves to be remembered. Petra endures not because it resists time, but because it belongs to it, carved into the rhythm of wind, sand, and sun, forever listening, forever whispering, forever the sand that remembered footsteps. The scepter that spoke in light. Beneath the golden light of dawn over Memphis, when the Nile still whispered through channels carved by gods and men alike, there was said to be a staff, not of mortal wood, but of something born from divine breath and the gleam of eternal purpose. They called it the Staff of Pa, the scepter that spoke in light. Its legend shimmered between temple columns and within the sacred halls of craftsmen whose hands shaped worlds from stone. The people believed Pa, the great creator god, had once walked among them, not as a distant deity of heavens, but as a builder, an artisan, who spoke reality into form through the word and through the hand. They said that when Pa fashioned the world, his staff glowed, a line of light that connected his heart, his tongue, and the earth itself. And in its glow, stone softened, metals obeyed, and the invisible patterns of the universe could be seen, if one dared to look. The story begins in a time when Memphis was the heartbeat of Egypt, a city where gods and kings met in shadow and dust. Its temples rose with quiet precision, shaped not for grandeur, but harmony. For the Egyptians believed balance itself was divine. At the center of the temple to Pa, amid incense smoke and chanting priests, the staff stood upright on its pedestal. It was said to hum faintly, a resonance not of sound but of vibration, like the pulse of light beneath stone. The priests never touched it directly. Only the high artisan, the one deemed most pure in craft and in word, could approach it. They said its light would dim if unworthy eyes lingered too long, and that those who sought to use it for power rather than creation would see only their own reflection in its polished length before being blinded by their greed. The scepter that spoke in light was no ornament. It was said to move, subtly, aligning itself toward the rising sun each morning. Some claimed it marked the solstice, others that it recorded the breath of the god himself, each flicker in its glow, a syllable in the divine speech that shaped all things. And when storms came over Memphis, and thunder rippled across the delta, the priests whispered that Petra had once again lifted his staff. The scribes of the temple wrote endlessly about its origin, but never agreed. Some said it was forged from meteoric iron, fallen from the sky in a night of fire. Others whispered it had been carved from a single rod of desert quartz, struck by lightning in the hills near Aswan. One record, half broken, suggested something stranger, that it was older than Egypt itself, older even than men, a tool left behind by beings who shaped matter through thought. They were cautious not to speak such heresy aloud. The temple guards remembered a time when one scribe tried to decipher its light. He believed the staff emitted patterns of radiance like hieroglyphs in motion, a living language that, if read correctly, could command the physical world. He vanished soon after, his chamber found filled with a smell like burnt cedar, and faint traces of glass fused into the walls. They said he had tried to speak the words of Qumran. The high artisan of the time ordered the staff sealed within 3 nested sanctums, accessible only during the festival of creation. Once each year, the priests carried torches of perfumed oil, their light quivering in the shadowed halls, and the high artisan approached the scepter. As he bowed, the glow of the staff answered, faint at first, then rising in intensity until the walls reflected a wash of gold. It was not a flame, nor electricity as we might know it, but something steady, alive, and impossibly old. In those moments, the city outside seemed to still. Birds quieted. Even the Nile's endless murmur seemed to wait, and the priest swore that for a breath of time, the god's voice could be felt, not heard. The hum of creation, the sound of balance restored. Centuries turned like the slow wheel of the stars. Dynasties rose, crumbled, and rose again. The scepter remained. Invaders came. Persians, Greeks, Romans, each curious, each fearful. Some sought to take it. The staff, they said, grew dark in their presence. In the time of the Macedonian conquest, when the temples of Memphis were looted for gold and stone, a soldier reached for it. Witnesses said his torchlight bent, flickered, and extinguished, though the air was still. The soldier screamed once, a high, strangled sound, and was gone, leaving only a shadow etched onto the wall behind him. The rest fled. Later, the staff was covered, entombed behind limestone, hidden from mortal greed. Its legend slipped into silence, swallowed by sand and centuries, but not entirely forgotten. When archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Memphis in the 19th century, they found beneath the rubble a peculiar recess, a stone socket, circular, perfectly smooth, aligned precisely to the cardinal directions. It contained traces of metal, unlike any other, fused into the stone. The composition baffled chemists. Not bronze, not gold, not copper. Its spectral lines showed elements not known to occur naturally. Nearby fragments of hieroglyphs spoke of light that obeys speech, and creation that breathes through sound. Some dismissed it as symbolic language. Others wondered if the ancients had captured something we no longer understand, a resonance between the spoken word and the energy of the world. Even now, in museums and archives, curators speak quietly about a strange artifact fragment recovered from a private dig near ancient Memphis in the 1930s, a piece of polished crystalline rod, faintly luminescent in the dark. Tests could not identify its material. It was warm to the touch, even after hours in cold storage. The artifact disappeared in 1942 during wartime transport. Some say it was stolen. Others suggest it was never meant to be found again. What if, as the old priests claimed, the scepter was more than symbol? What if it was a tool, or a transmitter, a bridge between thought and form? Ancient Egyptian theology was not mere religion, it was physics spoken in myth. Petra created through speech, through the word, through vibration. In his temples, sound was sacred geometry, frequency made flesh. Could the staff have been a resonant instrument, capable of aligning the molecular patterns of matter through harmonic tone? When the priests chanted, when drums echoed in perfect ratio beneath the pillars, perhaps they weren't worshipping, perhaps they were activating. The Temple of Petra was built with mathematical precision, its chambers tuned to amplify particular frequencies. Measurements of the ruins reveal acoustic effects identical to modern resonant chambers, low frequencies that vibrate through the body, altering perception, perhaps consciousness. Imagine then, a staff held in the center of that sound, a crystalline conductor pulsing with energy. Its glow not magic, but resonance. Its light, not fire, but frequency visible to the eye. The ancients may not have called it electricity, but they may have understood its essence. When night falls over the ruins of Memphis today, archaeologists working late sometimes report faint glimmers in the dust, a shimmer that seems to rise from the ground itself, golden, pulsing, like the reflection of torchlight where no torch burns. Perhaps it is only phosphorescent minerals, or perhaps the scepter that spoke in light is not gone. Perhaps it waits, humming softly beneath the earth, remembering the sound of creation. In the language of the ancients, the word Mentefer, Memphis, meant the enduring and beautiful. And maybe that is the truth of Petra's staff, that creation endures, beauty endures, and light never truly disappears. It only hides, waiting for a voice that remembers how to speak to it once more. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Unearthed Secrets, where the past still breathes beneath the dust. Every stone, every artifact, reminds us that history never truly sleeps, it only waits to be found again. If you enjoyed tonight's exploration, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Until next time, rest easy beneath the same stars that once guided the ancients.